Good afternoon. I want to start in a slightly unconventional way, not with greetings, but by saying thank you. Thank you to you, the association members in the room, and your colleagues for your commitment, professionalism, and passion in serving the public, for ensuring our country remains a safe place to live, and is one where intolerance to difference is not as prevalent as some with extreme ideals would want it to be. Every now and then, I'm privy to a conversation that I'm sure many of you hear too. This conversation will go along the lines: the job is not what it used to be, that it's not working, that it's broken. I could not disagree more. Policing has continued to change and professionalise itself throughout my service, but fundamentally we lead remarkable men and women who joined for the same reasons we did: to serve and protect the public. They will run towards danger when others are running away from it. They will put themselves in harm's way to keep others safe. They will display the same courage and commitment that has been true and strong in this great service since 1829. As long as there are people who want to keep the public safe, look after the most vulnerable people in society, and stop others from doing harm, this service cannot be considered broken. Each year, I have the privilege to sit down with others and undertake the impossible role of judging the Police Bravery Awards. We hear remarkable stories of incredible acts of bravery in saving lives. From the actions of PC Wayne Marks, just 2 years into the job, who tackled 3 terrorists at London's Borough Market with only his baton, to Sergeants David Wilson and Ian McIver, who just heard a noise and found themselves interrupting an armed robbery at a jeweller's. This is the routine of operational policing. The common thread in all the nominations is the mindset of the officers involved. I was just doing my job. I could not be prouder to be part of this service, and I know the public acknowledge and appreciate what you and your teams do as well. I would now like to welcome our members and guests, and of course you, Minister, to conference. It seems like only yesterday that I was addressing you all in my first year as President. As I said last year, my association has always had a constructive and positive relationship with the Home Office, its ministers and its officials. I do not anticipate this changing. We share a common motivation to serve the public and ensure our country is a safe place to live. In my time as President and also as Vice President, I have been impressed by the commitment and talent of the people that work in the Home Office. It is always easy to suggest we are working against each other, or that one of us does not understand the other. My experience has been the opposite. For me and my association, by working together with the Home Office colleagues, we can collectively achieve so much for the public good. However, there will always be occasions or subjects on which we disagree. I want everyone to be in no doubt that I and my association will always speak truth to power when we deem it necessary. And as I stated in my speech last year, we do this not to be contrary or unhelpful, but due to genuinely held beliefs that come from our professional knowledge and years of experience gained as senior operational leaders. This time last year, I said we had a new venue, a new president, a new Home Secretary, and a new policing minister. Well, some things have not changed, but that does not mean nothing has happened in that time. In fact, far from it. A general election and a new political environment, one I suggest we have not seen anything similar to since the 1970s. The start of us exiting the European Union, the tragedy of Grenfell Tower and the appalling and senseless terrorist attacks in Manchester and London, which I will come back to in a few moments. This year has been truly momentous and has challenged everyone in this country, including policing. And the service has responded magnificently to its challenges, as it always endeavours to. This response includes extraordinary acts of bravery. We will always remember the actions of PC Keith Palmer in protecting Westminster and giving his life to do so. Some may say these are extraordinary times, yet we've been operating at a severe threat level for 3 years, and that heightened state of alert for many more. And throughout this time, policing has continued to try and meet the extraordinary demand of calls for service across the spectrum of need. Paul, in his address tomorrow, will demonstrate the vulnerability equation, the weight of demand from vulnerability against the capability of the police to deal with it. This on its own is wide and complex, and that's before we consider the many other areas of demand on the service, such as terrorism, serious and organised crime, traffic collisions, cybercrime, or antisocial behaviour. Now, I'm going to pause here because I suggest we have a perfect storm developing, comprised of fewer resources, reduced public services, new threats, and a worrying increase in some types of traditional crime. What has become evident to me from speaking to my members over the last few months is that we have reached a tipping point. The police will always be there for the public. And as I said at the beginning, the service is not broken, but it is reaching the limit of what it is reasonably able to do given the enforced constraints on our structures. And even more worryingly, our people, on whom we are utterly dependent, are also reaching their limits. 3/4 of our membership took part in our latest personal resilience survey. Minister, this is a solid, credible and highly responsible evidence base. The messages you gave us came through loud and clear. You said that the current situation means many of you have trouble taking even a single day off work, working on holidays and rest days. More than 80% of you said that the roles you are performing and the increase in work demand are now too big and too much for one person without working excessive hours. More than 70% of you are not taking all your rest days or annual leave. And only 27% of you stated you had sufficient resources to do your jobs properly. So what does this all mean? Well, it means that you're not getting the time off to rest and recover. It means that 50% of you have indicated signs of anxiety and over 1/4 of you signs of depression. And yet, despite these constant pressures, you are saying that policing is your vocation and that you still get a buzz out of it. My message to you, Minister, and to the government is that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about the sheer commitment and dedication of the police service. I don't know what will. It is frankly unacceptable that the senior operational leaders in policing are under so much pressure that a quarter of them have signs of depression. These are people leading huge commands, some of them bigger than entire forces. These are people carrying responsibility for public safety, protecting the most vulnerable, for countering terrorism, for running firearms operations. It is not a healthy position for the service to be in. And Minister, it is definitely not in the interests of the public. Yes, we will always respond to the public need in major incidents such as the events we've witnessed this year. And yes, because of our roles and because of who we are, we will work that bit extra and give that bit more of ourselves. But I believe we have reached that tipping point. The relentless pressure, the ever-increasing demand, and the reduced resources are taking their toll. So, my association is calling for a number of specific measures. First, annual health screening for all members. We talk about the benefits of early intervention in preventing crime. We should practice what we preach with our staff and help make sure they can look after their health and potentially avoid becoming ill in the first place. We also need a nationally consistent welfare service for everyone in policing. This association, along with the Police Federation, have been pushing for this for some time. And Minister, I was delighted to hear the announcement by the Home Office for a £7.5 million pilot. I sincerely hope this provides the evidence base to support a national welfare service to give more support to overstretched and under-pressured officers and their families. We also need everyone at the superintending rank to have the equipment, skills and support to perform their ever more demanding roles. If the service cannot give them this, then it is setting its people up to fail. You may recall at last year's conference, I spoke about the unprecedented demand on colleagues leading public protection. We are now working with the College of Policing to introduce a licence to practice for everyone working in this field, which recognises the specialist skills and knowledge that are needed for these roles. This is a great first step, but the same support, I suggest, needs to be given in every area of command which requires specialist skills or knowledge. I do not want to hear of another member being moved into a role that he or she has no experience of or training in, and carrying all the risk and responsibility for the force's performance and the service to the public in that area. It is just not acceptable. I'm also asking for all forces to have in place an accurate means of recording all the hours being worked by their people. This is not just a legal requirement, but a fundamental tool for all leaders as the most basic indicator of how their workforce is working and where problems might be building. One theme that has come up time and time again is one of consistency across the service. We need senior leadership responsibilities to be fairly and evenly distributed across both individual organisations and the service as a whole, and for people to be fairly rewarded for this. Now, yes, I'm now going to mention pay, a topic that's been subject of much discussion over the summer. Police officers have families to support and mortgages to pay. These are some of the fundamentals of life, and we are not a special case in this respect. But where policing is different is that we want to feel that our remuneration reflects the complexity and breadth of commands we are in charge of, reflects the risk we take on behalf of the public, reflects the amount of hours, days, weeks we give extra of ourselves every year, reflects your roles that are accountable to a host of bodies and functions, and of course, rightly, the public. And perhaps most importantly, reflects the levels of responsibility that society asks us to carry on its behalf every single day. We are expecting the outcome of the pay review process to be announced soon. Now Parliament has returned after the summer recess. Together with the Police Federation, we submitted an evidence-based request for a pay increase of 2.8%. The public sector pay cap of 1% and the 2-year pay freeze has created a real term reduction of 18%. 18%. So we wait the outcome of the process this year very keenly. And if the answer is 1% again, I do not think I will be alone in calling into question the independence of the police remuneration and review body. This is the mechanism that decides your pay. There is a legitimate question over whether this and other mechanisms are working for the hard-working, dedicated people who serve as police officers. As police officers, we do not have the same employee rights as almost every other profession. We accept this when we join, but in return we expect that the mechanisms put in place that govern our pay, terms and conditions and rules and regulations are fair to the public we serve, to the taxpayer, but also to us. One aspect of working as a national officer representing you all in England and Wales is that I get to see the lexicon of different operating models, collaborations and strategic alliances. So my final ask is that all forces comprehensively scope the level of demand and resource at superintendent level before enacting these types of changes. In the last 7 years, 399 superintendents and chief superintendents have been taken out of overall police numbers. This is 25% of our membership. This is the biggest reduction at any rank. It is simply not sustainable to rely on a reduced number of senior leaders to work harder and longer with wider, more complex commands without really understanding if these responsibilities are achievable in the mid to long term. If you will indulge me a little here, it feels a bit like the legendary Greek god Atlas, who was eventually singled out by Zeus and forced to hold up the heavens as a special punishment. Now, I'm not presuming to compare you to Greek gods, but my point is that within policing hourglass, it appears to me to be you the superintending ranks in the very squeezed middle. Of course, I recognise those you lead are under pressure too, which highlights a major future problem. If the model of delivering policing services in the future is fewer people working longer, each doing ever more, then I would suggest that model is fundamentally flawed. We must not forget that the extra officers brought in to boost the policing presence after the terrorist attacks earlier this year were not, in fact, extra officers. There is no pool of extra officers to call on when demand surges. They were the same officers who police all the time, sacrificing their rest days and holidays to keep the public safe, putting the safety and welfare of others above their own. It simply has to be a core tenet of leadership that you look after your people. That means we in this room have a responsibility as leaders to look after our staff as well as looking after ourselves, just as those who lead us have that same responsibility. I will say it again, we must look after our people, because without them, there is no police service. Policing has had to take its fair share of contributing to austerity. In total, we have taken 34,000 people and £2.2 billion out of policing since 2010. I'm already on record as saying I think we have contributed more than our fair share. And policing has had to reform and must continue to reform. I support this principle because the organisation that stands still gets left behind. But I need to address what you have been telling me over the last year within the context of reform. We operate within a model of 43 forces devised in the last century using what was very likely a questionable evidence base even at that time. Now, it has become a significant inhibitor to how the service can address some of the 21st century challenges I've spoken about already. The types of challenges that do not respect force boundaries, like internet-enabled fraud, organised crime, online child sex exploitation, international terrorism. I'd like to quote you something. The analysis points to a future policing environment characterised by 1. Widespread enterprising organised criminality, proliferating international terrorism and domestic extremism. 2. A premium on intelligence, expertise and smart use of capacity. And 3. An increasingly risk-concerned public and intrusive media. I'll go on. This implies a major development in capability, and to achieve this, changes must be made, not only to the structure, but to the whole configuration of policing. Now, the current answer is collaboration. However, and I continue the quote, the modest scale of collaboration to date and the significant problems associated with it, such as governance and performance and accountability, suggest that at best, progress will be complex, slow, and of limited impact. Sounds fairly recent, doesn't it? But actually, I'm quoting from Closing the Gap, a review of the fitness for the purpose of the current structure of policing in England and Wales in 2005. This was 5 years before the service had to start meeting the challenges of cuts and austerity. And yet, when we examine post-2010, the HMIC, some 10 years later in 2014, said it had, quote, growing concerns in particular that neighbourhood policing risks being eroded, and continued to state that collaboration between forces, public and private sector organisations remains patchy, fragmented, overly complex and too slow. Now, there are, of course, great examples of leadership and collaboration across the country, and this is not meant to be critical of chief constables and police and crime commissioners who have to continue to face the significant challenges for their individual forces. Efforts at collaboration are well meant and driven by the necessity to keep providing services the public need or expect with reduced resources. But there are many examples of collaboration which are just suboptimal, with duplication held together by overworked superintendents and the failure to realise efficiencies because of this. Where within the collaboration arrangement there are, for example, different allowances for staff from different forces doing the same job, where ICT funding and budgets are cross-charged like mutual aid for the use of the same resources. This is not collaboration. It is at best a compromise to the current structures we're trying to deliver service within. Collaboration was not seen in the early days as the panacea. It was not the silver bullet, not an end in itself, but in the absence of any other ability to address the significant structural challenges facing the service, it has become exactly this. Which means that the end results can only ever be as good as the arrangements themselves, suboptimal. Events and the demands on this service have now, I believe, demonstrated a clear case for an open, honest and transparent debate and review with government, local authorities, police and crime commissioners and of course the public. This review should be about what the service should be expected to do, what it should not do, and then what is required in terms of structure, funding and resources to support this. Because we must and need to listen to what the public are telling us. In the latest Ipsos Mori polling for HMIC, around 1 in 4 people feel unsafe to walk alone at night. Deprived neighbourhoods were twice as likely to feel unsafe as people from affluent areas. 83% of people want a regular police presence in their local area, but only 18% felt they got it. Also worrying was that HMIC and Ipsos Mori found fewer than 3 in 10 people felt well informed about policing in their local area. Let us not forget that the reason for the introduction of police and crime commissioners in 2012 was because the government felt police had become disconnected from the public they serve. It promised police and crime commissioners would represent their communities, understand their crime and antisocial behaviour priorities, and hold the Chief Constable to account for achieving them. Police would be more accountable, accessible and transparent to the communities and therefore make our communities safer. This research suggests this policy outcome is still a work in progress. And this is important because if, as HMIC have identified, neighbourhood policing has been eroded across the country, and that in the past 7 years, 40% of all police stations have closed, and the public are indicating they do not feel informed of their local policing services, then history tells us that the consequences are the service becomes too distant and too reactive. This was identified over 35 years ago in the Scarman report. We must not repeat the mistakes of the past. As recently as last month, the National Police Chiefs Council spoke of an unprecedented increase in 999 calls. July's crime figures showed an 18% increase in violent crime. Officers are extracted from neighbourhood policing to respond to these demands and more. The terrible events and senseless loss in Manchester and London reminded us of how important policing is, and in particular, local policing and the connection to our communities. We must not lose this on the altar of endless savings. Now, I need to make one important point. I am more than supportive of local police delivery by local policing services, by identifiable police leaders who are accountable to the community. This is not new, and anyone who has been around policing as long as I have will recognise the value of this. But allowing change to evolve in this current inconsistent way across the service and the way collaboration is being implemented across England and Wales will not enable policing to reform at the pace required to meet the current and future challenges. And it will not meet the demands and expectations of the public that increasingly uses police as the service of first resort, last resort, and everything in between. If the funding constraints that have been applied to policing for the past 7 years are to continue, then, Minister, we need that conversation, we need that debate, and we need that review. Otherwise, we are being driven not by the need to provide the best possible policing service that meets the needs of the public, but by the need to save money. the amount of change, the cost of change, and the pace of change has unintended consequences. Moving to something different rather than better is not necessarily the answer. For us in this room and the thousands of colleagues across this service, that sense of duty, providing the best possible service to protect the public, is why we do our jobs. I said earlier, in our personal resilience survey, 90% of you stated that you still get a buzz out of policing and regard it as a vocation. I could not agree more. It is what we do and will always do, and something I feel as passionate about today as I did when I joined. Thank you.
Gavin, thank you very much, and I'm really keen to hear how the Minister responds to that very challenging speech. But first, I'd just like to play a message from the Minister's boss, the Home Secretary.
It's a great pleasure to be addressing this year's conference. I'm so sorry that I can't join you in person, but I'm delighted that the Policing Minister, Nick Hurd, will be speaking to you shortly. The Police Superintendents Association has always maintained a constructive dialogue with government and has taken an active role in improving policing. As Home Secretary, I'm committed to listening carefully to all that you have to say to me. This has been an extraordinary year for policing. The bravery and courage of officers has been evident to us all. The police response to terrible and tragic events in recent months has been remarkable, and the public support for the police is truly heartening. This government is committed to supporting the police to deliver the best service possible for the public and the officers who put their lives on the line for us all every single day. I deeply value your association's contribution, and I would like to see you continue to take the lead in reforming and guiding the police, as well as preparing your forces for the challenges of the future. I look forward to working closely with the Superintendents Association to ensure that policing is fit for the future. Enjoy the conference. Thank you.
So please welcome the Policing Minister, Nick Hurd.
Home Secretary wanted to be here. She genuinely couldn't be here. She's asked me to apologise to you personally for the fact that she is not here. I'm sorry I'm a compromise, but I really welcome this invitation because it gives me a chance to say a couple of things that I think are important. Nothing worse than politicians bearing platitudes, particularly under these circumstances, so I'm going to try and spare you those. Your president has compared you to Greek gods. I'm not going to go that far. But I do want to say this. As you know, I'm a new minister. You've had lots. You've seen them come and go, some good, some not so good, some pretty awful. And I'm sorry that there is such a turnover of ministers. It just seems to be the way that politics is at the moment. But I would just like to say this. So the Grenfell fire happened on day 2 of my watch. So as you can imagine, that has taken up a lot of my time. By the way, quite rightly, the firefighters get a huge amount of credit for their extraordinary service that night. But actually, if you talk to the firefighters, as I have done, one of the things they wanted to say to me was to place on record their respect for the bravery of the police that night, who went in and out of that building, protecting them, just using their riot shields as air conditioning units. Blocks of concrete, on at least one occasion, something far worse, crashed down around them. It was the firefighters who said, respect to the police. Just another example of what I, in the short time I have been minister, but also the years I've been as an MP, know, I think it's a truth that on every day in every force there are policemen and women taking risks, sometimes extraordinary, on our behalf. I'm also very aware, and if I can leave you with one message today, it is this: we are not deaf. Even if sometimes we give the impression we are. We are not deaf. Ever since I've been a minister, before I have heard a very, very clear and consistent message, not just from the meetings that I had with Gavin and Paul and Dan, but the meetings I've had across the country. I think in the last few weeks and months I had a chance to visit 9 forces, speak to 6 on the phone, as part of an ongoing process of engagement. And when I visit forces, I make sure I don't just sit down with the bosses, I sit down with the officers on the front line, and the message is very, very clear and consistent about stretch and strain and pressure. Experienced police officers telling me that in their experience they've never worked in these conditions before. Lots of frustration, lots of anxiety. When I read the results of your resilience survey, I believe them. Okay, so we're not deaf. We do get it. What I also appreciate, and not just because Gavin has been bending my ear about it, is that a lot of this pressure is concentrated on the senior operational leadership, you. So there are a lot of people in this room who over the last few years, jobs have got bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where in some cases I'm sure it is reason to ask, is this a job that one person can do? Which is the way that Gavin phrased it to me. I get that. And so for me today, this is a very important opportunity for me personally, not just as a member of the government, not just as a member of Parliament, but as a member of the public, to say thank you. And to try and give you some flavour of how we, the department, we, the government, are intending to try and manage this very challenging situation together. And it is together. And I really do value this first contact with the association, because it is, without wanting to stroke you too much or compare you to Olympians, it is officers like yourself, with your years of experience and your deep understanding of the challenges that policing must face up to. It's officers like yourself and the association that have the power, working with us, to shape your profession in the years ahead. And I do think, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a fundamental question that we've got to address, and it's not a straightforward one at all, which is how do we make sure, and it is a we, that the British public will continue to have access to and faith in a modern police force that is highly motivated and well equipped in every sense of the word to be genuinely resilient and able to cope with demand as it changes, as it evolves, and as it becomes more complex, which is what we are seeing at the moment, as you well know. And critically, because I don't want to smooth over this at all, how do we do that in the context in which we're operating, which is constrained public finances? And I think, and I believe that I am talking with a group of very realistic people. And so you will know that although there has been some progress on the journey towards getting back to a situation where we're living within our means and we have public finances in the state that we want them to be, we have not finished that journey. And, although there may be siren voices promising other things, the reality is that we are going to have to work through this in an environment of continued constraint in terms of the public finances. So this is a fundamental question, and it is a challenging debate. And Gavin, to your let me say straight up, I welcome this. The debate that you're talking about needs to happen, and it needs to, in my view, to go beyond the two very, very, very important issues that are going to dominate the debate and the headlines over the next few months. The first, of course, is pay. and I'm standing here as a representative of government who is painfully aware that police officers, as well as many other public servants, have had to make a very significant contribution to the process of reducing the deficit we inherited, and there's a limit to what we can reasonably ask of people. Very aware of that. Also very aware that there is considerable concern being expressed by employers about issues of affordability and sustainability, which we've got to listen to, which is why the process has taken a little longer than any of us would have liked. But there will be an announcement on that imminently. The second issue that is going to, and of course they're linked, that is going to dominate debate over the next few months is the shape of the 18-19 funding settlement, the amount of resources, particularly resources available to the front line. These are big, fundamental issues that we're going to have to work through. But I hope that the debate and the challenge that Gavin set is not just restricted to those two issues, however fundamental and important they are. Because I think the debate that we have to have in answer to that fundamental question of how we deliver the kind of policing service that everyone in this room, I'm sure, wants, it must result in a clear and shared understanding of the role and skill set that the modern police officer will require and the capabilities that we need to build together. It's a debate that also has to ask profound questions about how services interact with each other more effectively. I'm not just talking about police services, I'm talking about services across the public sector and across the criminal justice system. And frankly, it's a debate that's got to challenge my department vigorously about the role we play and the value that we add and how effective are we being in terms of supporting the police service to be more effective. Obviously, we don't have responsibility for the operations of the police, but we have considerable power in terms of our funding, our legislation, our ability to add or subtract to the bureaucratic burden in which you operate. We remain a department with a lot of power, a lot of responsibility, and it's right that this debate should challenge us. So let me just give you a bit of a steer about some of the things we're prioritising. You can tell me whether they're the right things or the wrong things. So let's start with resources, because that's the right place to start. Let me update you on a Home Office initiative that I hope you will welcome, and it's not something that we have done before. As I said at the APCC and NPCC Reform Summit back in July, please be in no doubt the government places great importance on maintaining the ability of the police and security services to respond to what are clearly evolving challenges to public safety. Now, we had the 2015 spending review where we protected overall police spending in real terms until 2020 and committed to increase cross-government spending on counter-terrorism by 30%. It's worth just noting that in this current financial year, 2017, we are investing £11.9 billion of the public's money in the police system, including the council tax precept. That's an increase in overall police spending of over £450 million since 2015-16 and includes £175 million in the police transformation fund. Now, you know the backdrop to this better than I do. We had some data out before the summer recess that was quite difficult for the public and frankly the media to absorb as well, because on the one hand we had the official crime survey which records the public's experience of crime, which shows that the trend, which I hope everyone in this room welcomes, continues to be down. In fact, well over a third down since 2010 and so 70% down since 1995. The public's experience of crime, long-term trend, decline, very welcome. But as you know, at the same time, we have a significant increase in recording crime, some of which represents a welcome improvement in police performance, and also very welcome increased public confidence in certain areas coming forward to report crimes in areas of tremendous sensitivity and complexity, such as sexual offences and domestic violence. But we're also very aware, and I was very frank about this at the time, that within that there are some very clear indicator that in some very worrying areas, such as violent crime, we are clearly seeing an increase. And in these conversations that I've been having with police leadership and rank fire, it's very clear that even, as my predecessor said, if crime is falling, crime is changing. And I'm very aware that in those conversations that the nature of what you are having to deal with force by force is changing, is becoming arguably increasingly complex, and with that comes consequences in terms of time and resource requirements. And frankly, we have to understand that better, which is why I've initiated and I'm leading a new process of engagement and have written today to police commissioners and chiefs, setting out this program of engagement, which we've not done before, force by force, to work together to get a better understanding about the changing nature of demand on policing and how that is being managed at the moment, what the current budgets imply in terms of further savings that are required, candid views on what further scope there is to find efficiency and improve productivity, candid conversations about state of morale and capability, and much greater transparency and accountability about strategy towards reserves, because you are part of a system that, for reasons I fully understand, is saying we'd like more cash. Well, as part of that conversation is we need a better understanding of what the plans are for using the £1.8 billion worth of the public's money that is sitting on police balance sheets, or was at the end of 2016. Just need to understand. But this is a new programme of engagement we have not done mid-flight, as it were, force by force, which I'm leading personally, to make sure that the decisions that we take this autumn about the funding settlement for next financial year are rooted in evidence and not assertion. And you will understand the importance of that. We've heard a very clear message. We're not deaf to it. Out of respect to it, we are rolling our sleeves up to engage force by force to make sure that we, in our conversations with our counterparts, have a very, very clear understanding of what is actually going on and what the case for investment is. I hope you will welcome that, as I hope you will also welcome some of the other initiatives that we are doing, which all fall into the space, I think, of trying to support the police, as the Home Secretary said, to evolve, to continuously improve, to be the kind of force delivering the service that we all want. You all know the importance, for example, of seizing the opportunity that digital technology, whatever label you want to put on it, brings. We all know from our lives just how much they have been changed over the last 10 years, or whatever time frame you want to put on it, by technology. Companies that we haven't even heard of 10 years ago now play an enormously important role in our lives. We know, and I know this from my previous job as Minister for Industry, just what is being developed, what are the potential and the opportunities. And I'm determined, and the Home Office is determined, and most of the police leadership that I meet are determined, that the police force sees these opportunities and are not left behind. And there's clearly a lot to do, ensure that policing is properly equipped to face these challenges, and that your people have the tools, the most modern tools for the job, because we've obviously got to adapt the way that we engage with the public, and the people will increasingly expect to contact the police in different ways and expect the police to be more responsive. You know, I was very lucky during one of my recent tours of police forces, I think it was in Bedford, to drive around and hear firsthand how technologies such as the automatic number plate recognition system there can help police with their work. And that's just one small example of the things that now feel possible and which we now have to seize. As you're probably aware, last year, with £4.6 million from the Police Transformation Fund, the MPCC set up the digital policing portfolio, which will help provide a step change, we believe, in digital capability, equipping forces with the tools to police effectively in a digital age and protect the public from digital crime. Last month, a further £12.4 million from the same fund was awarded to the digital policing portfolio, part of which will enable the development of a digital evidence transfer service. And this, as you probably know, is designed to allow forces to rapidly transmit the increasing body of digital evidence across the criminal justice system. In addition to this, I'm pleased to announce that a further £20 million from the same fund has been awarded to Sussex, Durham, Cheshire, Essex, Hampshire, Gloucestershire and Merseyside forces over the next 3 years for the reform of digital policing. Initiatives funded include measures to better identify and map organised crime, moves to maximise the use of video technology in the delivery of criminal justice. These will all be fully aligned to the digital policing portfolio's plans to deliver a seamless end-to-end digital policing journey from first contact through to disposal to better protect and engage the public, reduce the threat of crime, risk and harm, and bring offenders to justice. That's the idea anyway. You tell me what the reality is. But that, it seems to me, the right level of ambition. You will all know that this rapid technological change, when used in the right way, greatly benefits society. However, the internet and new technology has also become an invaluable tool for serious and organised crime. The changing nature of serious and organised crime is one of the reasons why the Home Secretary announced a review of our strategic approach earlier this year. Policing and law enforcement is at the heart of our response to serious and organised crime. We created the National Crime Agency in 2013 and we've invested over £120 million in regional organised crime units, but we do need to keep pace with the threat that is constantly innovating. That's why I'm pleased to be able to say again today that around £21 million from the Police Transformation Fund has been granted over the next 3 years for specialist capabilities. Retired Chief Constable Mick Creedon brought forward a national bid in response to the Home Secretary's expectations that up to £15 million of the fund for 2017-18 would be used to transform capabilities and improve the efficiency of the response to tackle the emerging threats from serious and organised crime. This will provide the NCA and policing with new capabilities to detect, monitor and disrupt organised crime groups. But serious and organised crime is not a remote threat. It strikes at the heart of the communities you police, exploiting the most vulnerable in society. And police has a vital contribution to make in tackling that threat. HMIC has found 4 forces to be outstanding in their response, and I want to see that number increase. And the superintending ranks have got a key contribution to make. So investment in new tools, investment in technology that can help make a difference. We're also trying, from the Home Office, to support smarter ways of working. Now, I heard Gavin speak very powerfully about some of the complexities, risks, frustrations around collaboration. Obviously, Minister, I always get to see the other side of that, which is, you know, the shiny stuff and the stuff that's working, as I've seen in Cleveland together. But your words, Gavin, have been quite sobering, encouraging me to try and get a bit under the surface of some of the reality of these collaborations, which are, of course, part and parcel of the system's response to the times. So I take that on board as well. But what you're also aware of, which is we're also keen to encourage greater collaboration between emergency services in the name of delivering a better service to the public. And as you're aware, through legislation, we introduced a statutory duty to collaborate on police, fire and ambulance, and keeping that under review. It's a flexible and broad duty. We've enabled PCCs to take responsibility for their local fire and rescue service where a local case is made. I'm delighted that the first police and fire crime commissioner looks like being Essex in October, who have been, I think, the first area to seize that opportunity. And I welcome the fact that several other PCCs are exploring the opportunities available, and I look forward to hearing their findings. But it's not just about collaboration, where we want to encourage smarter ways of working. Gavin, again, you talked very powerfully about the importance of local policing. And I know, you know, speaking frankly as a constituency MP, I know exactly how the public feel about it. And you've had a discussion this morning about the CT implications of this and the thinking that's going on inside the system about the role of local policing inside the new counter-terrorism strategy. And I've seen for myself from going out on patrol in Newcastle just what a difference really clearly thought through local policing strategy can make, and the impact that that has, frankly, on a very important local economy there in Newcastle. So we understand again, because I've heard it directly, that some forces are feeling considerable pressure on neighbourhood policing, and we are keen to try and help through the Police Transformation Fund to support innovation and prevention and problem solving, which again, I'm delighted to say that around £12 million from the PTF has been allocated the next 3 years to North Yorkshire, Derbyshire, Wiltshire, Northumbria and the Met for their proposals in local policing. So support for the new tools, support for smarter ways of working. What we've also got to do from the centre is look again very hard at the drivers of demand, the things that take up the time. And one of the things in my relative ignorance that has struck me very, very powerfully right from the start is the issue of mental health and the relation that it has with police time and police demand. And I think you talked about it, Gavin. Every force I've visited has talked about it. Indeed, when I sat down with the Police and Crime Commissioner in Kent, who's a lead in this area, his estimate is that a third of the time of his force is spent dealing with people who have mental health issues. That's an astonishingly high number. I'd be very interested in getting some feedback in Q&A from your relative perspective on that. And I know, Gavin, it's been a priority for your association. I think there's been good progress through a number of initiatives to improve the way the police and their partners respond to vulnerable people experiencing mental health crisis, but it's clearly a long, long way to go. Suffice to say, we expect to implement shortly provisions contained in the Police and Crime Act 2017 to help improve outcomes for people in mental health crisis. This will embed the progress that has been made on reducing the use of police cells as a place of safety, ensuring that such use is indeed a rarity. We're also, as you're probably aware, making significant investment in terms of increasing the capacity and capability and support in the area of mental health, long overdue in my view. But I am very struck by the conversations I've had around the patch about the concerns from police forces that they have become the service of first resort in terms of supporting some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And that is an area that you have my personal undertaking that I'll be working with colleagues in the Home Office to explore with my colleagues at Department for Health what is the reality on the ground and what we can do from the centre to try and lift some of that pressure. Let me close, because I've gone on probably too long, with the strand that is perhaps most relevant to the resilience survey, Gavin, which is around investment in well-being. It's obviously in a people business, and this year's tragic events have also been clearly a very stark reminder of the bravery shown by police officers, and I'm under no illusions about the stress, frustration, anxiety that is out there. And Gavin, you've laid that out very clearly to me in private and in public today. So it's important that the government acts to, when and where we can, add value. So in June, we awarded an additional £1.5 million to Mind to ensure they're able to help emergency service workers involved in response to recent tragedies. In July, we awarded £7.5 million of funding over 3 years to pilot, and if it is successful, fund a dedicated national service to help provide enhanced welfare support for any officer or member of staff who needs it. And I thank you, Gavin, for your welcome for that initiative. So there is a lot going on, ladies and gentlemen. In conclusion, what I would say is all of the issues I've discussed today will clearly have a very direct impact on your members and police in general. You've been vital partners through the development of most of these proposals, and I know that my officials, many of whom are here today, as well as previous ministers, have benefited from your experience, and I hope that is something that will continue, that we maintain this strong working relationship, constructive, challenging. I expect to be challenged, but given the challenge that we face, I hope that we can continue to keep this a very constructive relation to deliver the kind of continuous improvement that we all want to see, and which, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, is the hallmark of every world-class organisation, however challenging the financial circumstances they're operating. You are all leaders in a public service that is the envy of the world. I've lived overseas, I've listened to people in many countries talking about this country, and the quality of our policing is part of what makes this country so distinctive and great. I genuinely believe that. And one of my overriding impressions from the many conversations that I've had sitting around tables, eating biscuits, listening to frontline officers in particular, is that the police service we have, all 43 individual cells of it, we can have that conversation about whether that is the right structure going forward, is full of fantastic, fantastic people who may enjoy the odd moan, because don't we all, but who love doing the job. And it is an amazing job. And that is what has come through every conversation that I've had. But let me be very clear. No government can take that for granted. And this one certainly will not. Thank you.
Well, Minister, thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming. Let's just tackle head-on the Home Secretary's non-appearance then. Was she for it?
Anyone who knows Amber would know the answer to that is no. No, I mean, as I meant what I said at the start, Kathy. She's very conscious of the fact that she wasn't here last year. She really did want to be here, but she genuinely couldn't today, which is why she asked me to say sorry in person, and I am sorry that I'm here as a compromise. But her apologies are entirely genuine.
Well, you are here, so it falls to you to respond to what Gavin Thomas called a tipping point. Specifically, half of superintendents and chief superintendents experiencing symptoms of anxiety. Police Federation members say that their members are at breaking point. I mean, lots of senior former police officers and current ones say the public feel less safe. You've said in your speech that you're not deaf. Is that a hint that you accept that the police do need additional resources?
What it means is that I am not deaf, and we are not deaf, and the message is very clear, which is why I have kicked off with the support of the Home Secretary this process, which we've not done before, during the middle of a spending period, which is to go through this process of engaging force by force to really understand what is going on, so that the decisions we take for the 18-19 funding settlement, which is a process that has to go through Parliament back end of this year, beginning of next, if there is an argument for new resources to the front line of policing, that is an argument that is rooted in really solid evidence. So I would encourage police forces and the association to see that as a very constructive sign that the Home Office wants to engage, wants to do so in a way that isn't too bureaucratic or plodding. But we are very conscious that some things have changed since 2015 settlement, some obvious things in terms of the terrorist activity that we're having now and to manage what feels like an escalating and evolving risk. But we're also very conscious that the nature of crime is changing, and actually what the demand that is having to be managed by police forces across the country is changing, is arguably becoming more complex and more time-consuming. And therefore, because public safety is a primary responsibility of any government, I think it is only responsible for us to do this review alongside the work we've done before in terms of what's called the fair funding settlement, that we look at this holistically so that the decisions that we take, critical decisions about where resources are allocated, are genuinely informed by hard evidence and not assertion, because assertion won't win any arguments in the current environment.
But it does sound like a hint that you are pushing the case for more money with the Treasury.
I'm pushing forces to explain to me and the system what is really going on, so that if there is a case for more resources to the front line, that is really well evidenced.
Well, let's take questions on that point. If anyone's got a thought on that, it's an invitation, it seems to me, from the Minister to make your case. So let's do that right now. There are roving mics. put your hand up. This is your chance to question the Minister. He may not be the Home Secretary, but he's been good enough to come today. So please give us a wave. I can't see any hands going up. I mean, I've got plenty more where that came from, but just here, please. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Simon Evans. I'm from the Met Police. We hear often politicians make a commitment to community policing. Of course, the reality in terms of the cuts that we're facing is somewhat different. I'm about to announce that every single one of my safer neighbourhood bases in my borough in London will close. Another police station will close. And with the other amalgamations we are about to see in London in terms of BCUs amalgamating, see an exodus of officers from there. Even with all that, we still face £350 million shortfall in London. And when the 5,000 officers go as well from the force that will lead to, they will only be found from within community policing if we're still to do all the other things that have been mentioned earlier on today. In light of those, loss of bases, loss of officers, loss of police stations, how can you assure us that you actually are committed to the community policing that you've mentioned?
Go ahead.
Direct, or do you want to go? Okay. Simon, well, as you know, I'm a London MP myself, so the issue of the Met is one that's very dear to my heart. Look, the fundamental issue is this. I'm very aware that some forces have been very clear with me that, the funding pressures mean that the most vulnerable part of the choices they have to make is community policing. In other areas, they said that is the last thing that is going to go. Essentially, these are. There are choices and decisions to be made. What I'm trying to do through the process I've just elaborated is to make sure that we in the centre fully understand what is likely to materialise if things stay the way they are. We need to have a proper understanding of what, for example, 2020, 2022 is likely to look like if things stay the way they are in terms of the kind of decisions that may have to be taken, And we could just plough on, but I think you should take some encouragement from the fact that, as I said, we have listened to the very clear voice, and we are sufficiently concerned and respectful of that to do this work, force by force, including the Met, of course, to genuinely understand what the implications are of flat cash force by force in terms of what may have to give and some of the choices that have to be. And then we can feed that back into the centre and saying these are likely to be some of the consequences of the current settlement in terms of shaping of policing in 2022. That's for me is part of the point, in fact the fundamental point of this exercise that I'm leading. Yeah.
What about your analysis of what the decisions that the government has already taken? So, for example, the fall in police officer numbers of 18,991, 13% between September 2010 and 2016. What's your analysis of the impact of that? Are you content with that?
No one likes seeing anyone lose a job. So I would never use the word content. I come back, Cathy. I mean, you've interviewed enough politicians over the years, and since the age of austerity started. I don't maybe I do have to rehearse the arguments around the context. As a country, we've been living beyond our means. We have to get back to a situation where the public finances are in better health. Something has had to give.
But was it the right decision for the police to give?
I think every part of the public sector has had to give. What I would say, and I'm not remotely complacent about this because or naive about this. I'd say two things. One is let's not lose sight of the backdrop to this in terms of what's happened in terms of the public's experience of crime, which has continued to fall despite the reduction in the number of officers. I'd also say this will be controversial.
Big increase in knife and gun violence, though.
I said in my speech one of the things we have to manage and understand through this analysis is, okay, we've got the official data, national statistics in terms of the public's experience of crime, but offsetting that in terms of our calculations is what's happening in terms of recorded crime. And I was very honest at the time and in my speech about saying within that there are some very worrying signs of genuine growth in crime in certain areas, including violent crime, which I think we're on top of. But I come back to the main point. The past is the past. We've lost a number of police officers. Most kind of, I think I'll be pushed back on this, but what I've observed is the conversations I had with many of police leadership has said, actually, we have found efficiencies that perhaps we wouldn't have found if we hadn't been forced down this route. But what I'm most concerned about now is the next few years and the consequences of these reductions and what flat cash means in terms of future savings that may need to be realised and what that means in terms of the ability of police forces across the country to do the job they want to do. And that's why I'm leading this process of engagement force by force to really understand what is happening so that if we have to take new decisions, if we have to revisit the evidence, we have got good information.
So I have another question.
That's the process I'm leading.
There was one question behind that one that I saw. Oh, you've got the mic. Great.
Yeah, good afternoon, Minister. My name's Mark Lay. I'm a Detective Chief Superintendent with Bedfordshire Police. One of the areas that we've spoken about today is that demand is clearly outstripping our current supply. And an area where the Home Office could provide assistance is an acceptance that within that environment mistakes will be made and how we actually really adopt a lessons learned culture. It's an area that we're trying to move to in policing, but where the Home Office could provide assistance, and it isn't one that costs any money, but in terms of providing, encouraging the IPCC and other organisations to adopt more of a lessons learned culture. This would obviously look at reducing anxiety on a number of police officers, and get away from the current punitive environment, operating environment that policing is in. With the amount of decisions that have to be made on a daily basis around threat risk harm, the environment we're working in, clearly mistakes will be made, but it is trying to encourage that lessons learned culture. And so I'd be interested to know how you as a Home Office could assist there.
Well, Mark, that's a very question. Of course, you represent a force that is, a relatively small force facing a lot of big challenges. And I've been to visit your force, was very impressed by what I saw and heard. And actually what you've touched on is something I should have made clear in my speech. One of the fundamental questions we are asking of ourselves at the Home Office, and I'm pushing the system hard on this, is, what can we do to help? It's very tough out there. What can we do to help at the centre, at the Home Office? And we need ideas from the front line. We need ideas from forces on that. Now, you raised the IPCC. They've got a role to do. Of course, they've got a very important role to do in terms of helping to protect the integrity of the police and safeguarding the trust that the public have in the police. On my journey through politics, I'm the son of a former police minister and Home Secretary. I've seen public sentiment towards the police shift over generations from a situation where in my dad's day, you couldn't criticise the police, to a situation back in sort of 2008 where I was chairing meetings in my constituency where the public were very critical of the police, to the point now where actually I think the police have a lot of respect from the public and trust from the public. IPCC have got a role to play in that, that. They've got to go about their business in a proportionate way. Part of our role is to sensitise them to that. In that envelope, I'd extend towards the inspectorate, HMIC, again, very clear message from police chiefs in particular. Their main beef is about the amount of time that they have to spend coping with inspections. I'm delighted to say the HMIC are piloting a more risk-based approach on one of the pillars of their inspection, and we'll see where that goes. But you're quite right, Mark. Your basic premise, is there more that the Home Office can do to make life a bit easier at a time when it is really tough? Yes, and we are genuinely open to ideas.
Question from the app here. Minister, how is the government planning to address and reduce the inappropriate demand placed on the service by other organisations such as health and social services to enable us to undertake policing?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and one I'm very sensitive to, and that's part of what I'm trying to unearth from these personal conversations I'm having with police leadership up across the country, in which officials are supporting me. And again, I come back to the need for kind of hard evidence of what is really going on. You know, I've got, for example, on mental health, some statistics that saying that the issue of police cells being used as places of safety, the trend is in the right way. But the conversations I have with individual police forces, I mentioned the Kent Police Commissioner saying a third of their time spent with mental health, the anecdotal evidence that on the ground police forces feel that other services are retreating and that they have to go in and fill the space. That concerns me a lot. I need the evidence to be able to take into, for example, the Department for Health and saying, actually, whatever you're being told by your system, this is the reality of the ground, and this isn't right, and this is what we have to change. Again, this is part of, I'm sounding like a broken record, part of this process which we've not done before, of really trying to drill down in force by force as to what is happening on the ground, so that we can extract from that good hard evidence that we could take into conversations with the Treasury and other departments as we shape the decisions that are big decisions are going to take place over the next 6 months.
Another question from the app. There's a clear split in the Cabinet over the 1% public sector pay cap. Would the Minister tell us where he sits in this debate and whether he supports the police case?
Well,
for
on this occasion, I'm delighted to say I'm not in the Cabinet, so any splits I feel are personal.
Do you support the case for the 2.8%
I think what I said...
personally?
No, Cathy, you're not going to lure me into that. That would be that would have career consequences I'm not prepared to contemplate. But the reality, I mean what I said. I'm very, very conscious, and I know most of my colleagues are very conscious, that over a number of years now, and it does feel a long time, that public service, people working in the public service, including police officers, have had to make a significant contribution, not just through pay, but also pensions, to the very necessary process of reducing the deficit. And I meant what I said at the end. We absolutely no intention of taking the police force or any other public service for granted. So the decision, there's a recommendation from a body that, as far as I can see, is genuinely independent, which we've got to take a view on based on assessments of fairness, but also assessments of affordability and sustainability, because there's no point us marching people up the top of the hill if we have to march them down again. So these are part of the difficult judgments we have to make. But anyway, all will become clear very shortly.
I have one more go at this.
Good luck.
Is it fair to say, I'm getting a sense from what you're saying that you believe that the contribution from the police to austerity may have gone far enough now?
No, what I'm recognising is that there has been a very significant contribution, not just from the police, but even if I was addressing an NHS audience, then they would be feeling exactly the same. That is the reality.
So there may be some more significant contributions to come.
No, what I'm hoping is that we will show the wisdom of Solomon in terms of trying to come to a proposal very shortly that will balance the needs of fairness and affordability. That's what I would say.
Another question from the floor. At the back there? Are you standing up to ask a question? Yeah, brilliant, thank you.
No, she's
you're
a mic.
wanting to hold the mic. Okay, here, great. It's hard to see with these lights. Great. Go for it, it's your turn in the spotlight.
Hello, Mr. Neil Evans, Greater Manchester Police. You talked about the Home Office's role in things like bureaucracy and supporting things. Can I just mention to you the Home Office recording standard for crime recording? And it would be easy to stand here and belittle it, but it's one of the things that my office has complained to me about on a consistent basis. We were graded as inadequate GMP about 18 months ago around crime recording, so absolutely we've got to get the balance right. But in a time of austerity, when we're having to seek how to use resources properly, it does seem that we are using an inordinate amount of time, resources, to record lower level crimes that really add no value in our view, and certainly frontline officers' view, to policing. So rather than stand here and belittle it and talk about how HMI is here inspecting on us, could I just invite you to have a look at that, have a review of it? Because in my sort of 27 years, it changes year on year on year, and we don't necessarily understand what is the benefit.
Is that supported in the room? In which case I accept the invitation. I've heard it myself directly, but it's very helpful for me to hear it again today. And these are exactly the kind of ideas, suggestions, prods, kicks that frankly, that we need. But I need it from you.
Another question from the app. Police data shows crime increasing, yet the government keeps saying crime is going down. What data are you reviewing and what's the source? We're confused with conflicting data.
Yeah, it is confusing, and I did my best on the sort of media round to try and present it as I see it. So we have, I think you know this, but we have two sources of data that sort of guide us. The first are the official, crime statistics that have been around for a long time, which is the survey of whatever it is, 30,000 households that ask people about their experiences of crime. Okay, that does what it says on the tin. We then have the data that flows from the police recording of crime. And that's clearly a different exercise. And on the face of it, they sometimes tell you different things. So the official statistics about the public's experience of crime show a long-term decline. Do they capture all crime? No, but that is how the survey is set up. Police recorded crime is showing a rise. Now, if you break that down, part of that is good news because you know as well as I do there have been criticisms in the past about the efficiency of police recording of crime, which is partly why the sort of new standards and everything were introduced. You'll also be painfully aware that certain segments of the communities that you serve, in particularly very sensitive crime areas, sexual violence, domestic violence, people have not felt the confidence to come forward and report this crime. If there's evidence that is changing, then that is welcome. But I'm not kind of whitewashing that data because within that there is clearly evidence in some parts of the country there are increases in genuine growth in crime in some very worrying areas, not least violent crime, not least knife crime, which collectively we've got to stay on top of. So the data is a bit confusing, but it reflects two different sources of data which are trying to do different things. One is to record people's experience of crime, and one is to record police's recording of crime. They're different things.
I think we've got time for one more very quick question. Anyone in the audience wanted just there, thank you.
Minister, my name's Tim Innes. I'm a commander from South Yorkshire. It relates really to what Gavin's alluded to. I think there's a general frustration, and certainly amongst colleagues, that the government just still seem wedded to 43 forces. There's never really any proper comment around that. I welcome the fact that you want to engage more with NPCC and the association around what you think policing needs to look like, but there is a wealth of evidence out there already tells us, not least to which was the Stevens report. You get HMIC under the bonnet everywhere, every year, telling us what's not working. They won't make recommendations nationally, and I think historically the current administration has felt it was NPCC's job to make that determination, which is why we're in the mess we're in around collaboration and the sheer postcode lottery that the public shouldn't have to suffer. My question to you, Minister, is around leadership. Isn't it time that the government and the Home Office took their own responsibilities seriously around this and actually understood that there is a need at the centre to formally review the state of 43 forces and properly look at how they can achieve proper efficiency and effectiveness, not just by slashing budgets and hoping for the best, but actually by structurally reforming the policing? Because so there's a person in this room that would think that 43 forces feels or looks efficient, and the public certainly don't get the benefit from that.
Tim, well, I mean, you've expressed that very powerfully. You've got a reaction to your comments, which I'm obviously going to respect. You know the background much better than I am. I'm a relatively new minister, but you know that we've gone through a process of change and devolution and a change in the role of the Home Office. As I said in my speech, we continue to retain a lot of power and responsibility through the purse strings and our ability to legislate and sort of oversight of of the system, but we deliberately went through a process of devolution of power, and that remains our instinct. What I will say to you is, I will be personally very interested as I go through these conversations, force by force. I will be personally very interested in absorbing the views in the system about the efficiency of the current system and whether it is, as Gavin was suggesting, suboptimal or not. If I get that message loud and clear, it would be irresponsible of me to ignore it. What I would also say to him, I would not be surprised if over the next few months or years, proposals did not come forward for rationalisation. I'm aware of at least one conversation in that respect at the moment. And again, we will look at that and support it if there's a good case. Our instinct, which is there to be challenged, is to support and encourage devolution and respond to what feels like local priorities and what is right locally. That, I think, is the instinct in the DNA of the place at the moment. But if through this process and this debate that Gavin has quite rightly called for, we get a very different message from the system, then of course we will listen to that.